You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and we have the band Caustic Casanova here with Steph Zenker and Francis Berenger, and very happy to have you joining us from what I understand to be a stormy state of Maryland. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yeah, so I came in contact with your music, little known to the audience that Something Rather Than Nothing has hidden correspondence throughout the country, and some of those to identify metal bands. And my friend Eric got to see you live and raved, and so I got excited about your music and have you here, and just wanted to chat about your music and the big philosophical questions. And I'm going to hit you, Steph, with the first one. When you were born, were you an artist?
That's a really good question. And it's really awesome to be on a podcast like this that kind of delves deep into the philosophical side of things, because Francis and I talk about this kind of stuff a lot. So that initially strikes me as kind of a nature versus nurture question in a way. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think generally you can have natural talent, but then also do you have the space in your life to kind of cultivate creativity, right? That's like a little bit of both nature and nurture. And for me, I sort of think it was both. So yeah, I mean, I'd have to think a little bit more deeply about that, but that's my initial answer, I think.
Yeah. So Francis, you're born into this wild world. Are you an artist then?
Well, I think that, I think it's such a fascinating question. I mean, I think that, the basic answer that goes to something about nature versus nurture or fate or, destiny, is that I feel like I was born with the capability and the tools and probably some sort of inclination or direction towards being an artist, but I could have seen myself definitely not being one.
It's actually interesting because there's a pretty big difference in the way that Francis and I sort of grew up with, or sort of grew into our love of music and our playing of music. So that's an interesting point that you bring up.
And I think, you could go a lot deeper than that too, and to say something like, well, there's only one path that you go down, and therefore the question answers itself that, of course, you are born to be an artist because it's self-evident that you become one, but that gets into stuff that could be, 4 hours of talking about how do we know what we know and all of that kind of thing. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, we can drop back down there because I have the vague suspicion I get a couple willing participants here. But let me jump to the big kind of the big question as we talk about music and art, and I'm going to go with you, Francis, and this is the big one. I'm looking for a definition of art. Like, you're an artist, you're creating music, you're piecing this together, you have a final product, and you think about art, but what is art?
I mean, oh God, that's such a big one. I mean, it's almost like I mean, it almost seems like it'd be easier to answer the question by negation, to say what is not art. I think there are people that say everything or anything is art that you say is art, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. Not necessarily I don't know that a refrigerator is art.
You mean a rotting banana stapled to a wall isn't art?
So I don't know though. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know if that banana is art. Just it's almost like the legal definition of pornography. That's like I know it when I see it, but that's only internal to me. I mean, I think like a really normal, boring, uninteresting, not that deep answer is something that is some sort of creative, intentional process or product or result that has no that fulfills that its creation and that its creation is self-fulfilling. So to do it is its reward. Is its value is in the making of it, and that's its highest value.
Yeah.
As opposed to like there can be value in making a door or a table that isn't art, but that's not its highest value.
I think intentionality really is a big one. Like, and because art is so subjective, like some people say it's the ultimate form of self-expression, that's like so vague, but I think anything can qualify as art as long as it was intentional.
Intended to be art.
Intended to be art, or like an expression of creativity. Whether you think that it's, bullshit or something, it doesn't matter, because it's the intentionality of the actor.
I guess if it's art to that person, then it is art. I don't know.
Yeah. That's what I would say. I think, yes, sure.
Yeah, in these discussions, intention comes up a whole lot. Like, the intention to be creating art. And Francis, that definition, I just had a conversation recently. The pornography definition is one commonly used for art. Like, you have this like a judicial decision that basically says you know it when you see it, and it feels so unsatisfying as an answer, but there's been no better answer. And for some folks, it's art. I've named it as such, and therefore it is. I looked up one of the things I've really become interested in is some of the language around this, and something saying something and nothing, and using this language in philosophy. And I looked up Wittgenstein's comment on art, which meant a lot to me. And he said, in art, it is hard to say anything as good as saying nothing. So like we're in this territory sometimes where it's like, and particularly in that philosophy, is like there are things you should talk about and there's things you should show. And I think it's like, here it is. Like, I like the Warhol, like what you get away with and what you show as being art. I've just been bumping into those themes, but I want to follow up on art. And you mentioned the intention to create art and to that process and to achieve it. But what's the role of art? I've asked this question through the pandemic and through, times great social upheaval, at least how I see it right now. So right now, what is art doing for people? What should it be doing for people?
I mean, a lot of different things. For me, it does a lot of different things. It's a distraction, an enjoyment, an emotional escape, a mental escape, a stress reliever in terms of like creating the art, but then also experiencing other people's art. I'd say the same kinds of things. Especially now too, I think a really important element of it is that it's bringing people together, because everybody's sort of in this pandemic all over the world at the same time together. And so that might inform people's like experiences of what any kind of art might be, in a way that strikes them differently than it would have otherwise. That's like, I feel like that came out super vague.
But we're
talking about the meaning of art. So
yeah, the role. What's this, Francis? What you put out a song, or somebody's put out is the role of art different now in our times, or is it, just kind of?
I mean, writ large, like I don't think the role of art, like as a blanket statement, really ever changes, because I think it's so, or it's the net it casts should be so vast that it could be, and you're talking about things that are better shown than told, or more impactful, or more meaningful, or more relevant shown than told. I mean, I feel like when we're talking about social and political upheaval, or depression and isolation, and the pandemic and all of those types of things, I mean, I think that the art is so, it seems to me like so self-evidently important to a lot of people, both creators and just consumers of it, but it's so vast. It can be, it could be the way that someone gets into channeling their anger or their emotion, or their the way that they just can't seem to get into a problem, whether it's personal or political or whatever, that they can't get into it in a productive way at all except via that. And then there's the complete other way, there are some people that can't seem to get out of these things, escape them in any meaningful way without art. So I mean, it's like it can be the way in and the way out of almost like anything,
or nothing
in life, or nothing, but I mean, it can be so big in so many different directions for a lot of different people. And I mean, anyone who's had, a particular song or painting or book or whatever hit them in a particular way that just felt right for the time, or perfect for the moment, as a way of, letting the gas out of the bag, or finally focusing on something that had been eluding them. I mean, it's like, it's just, I don't know.
Well, that strikes me as that very real feeling. I found, like, at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm doing the podcast, I'd done some episodes, and then like my first reaction when the pandemic went down, I was like, why the fuck do a podcast? Like, like the collapse is upon us. And it was just like a visceral initial reaction. But that's where the question came up for me, was like, all right, well, what do we do with our time now? And so I appreciate your comments on that. I want to go to a track. One of the things I don't do to audiences is introduce a great band, but then not play their music for too long. So for the listeners, we're going to cut to the track Memory King, and we're going to be back in just a tiny bit and chat some more with Caustic Casanova. thank you for that song.
You're welcome.
You're welcome for making it.
I love that song, and it's metal times for me right now. It feels very, very metal, and so I really appreciate that. Can you, when I talk to musicians, particularly in like a scene or a metal scene from an area, I usually try to get a little bit of a taste for what it's like in the metal scene in the area. I know I lived in Washington D.C. I have some background in like D.C. punk, Washington D.C. underground punk, and what's it like out here in the Pacific Northwest? Metal grows from the soil, the wet, damp doom, cannabis smoke, wet, drippy rain. Doom grows from the ground here.
Right.
Metal? What's the scene like for you over there?
Well, we had the DC punk stuff that you mentioned, obviously. Something that a lot of people that don't already love the doom genre know about is that Frederick, Maryland has an amazing doom metal scene, and was one of the progenitors of doom worldwide. Essentially, people come from all over the world to the Maryland Doom Fest, which has been running for, I'm not sure of how many years, but I mean,
8 or 9.
The doom scene here in Frederick stretches back to the 70s or something at least.
Yeah, I mean, the Maryland, DC, the Maryland suburbs and DC have a pretty historic connection to a lot of the Black Sabbath influenced music, for lack of a better word, with Pentagram and the Obsessed, and a lot of the bands that sprang from that, who were also all in their own way connected to the DC punk scene. I mean, it was such a small thing, the DC punk scene, when it was starting in the 80s, that it commingled with the metal scene, that especially the Maryland doom metal scene that still exists to this day. And, that was part of even what made Fugazi. Fugazi was their, them going around saying, we love Black Sabbath, and we love, Ted Nugent and Aerosmith and stuff. And we're not afraid to take those riffs. And, if people are angry, that doesn't sound like Minor Threat, and then there's a little bit of metal in Fugazi, so I think the DC Maryland scene is so interesting and has such an interesting history that people forget sometimes to go down like a couple levels into the basement and dig. It's even more interesting under the surface, especially with regard to the connections between some stuff that people don't necessarily make, and also just to, I'm sure about how small that group of people was in DC that made it into an internationally known punk rock, capital. This beginning as 35 or 40 people with, we're talking about intentionality and art and making things happen, and by sheer force of will. That never ceases to not inspire me. That never stops inspiring me.
Yeah. And it's crazy too, because Francis and I just moved to Frederick 3 years ago. We had lived in DC for years in Northern Virginia. And it's insane how many people in Frederick, including musicians, that aren't like part of the heavy music scene, and that the community itself isn't aware of the heavy music legacy of Frederick and Maryland. Nobody that isn't already a fan of metal or doom or heavy music doesn't knows about the festival or this history.
I know that it is planned for next year, because I've kept track of the Doom Fest out there in Maryland. I believe that is scheduled for next year, and I actually haven't been to it, but there used to be a very good metal fest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yep.
over.
Milwaukee Metal Fest.
Yeah, like 3 or 4 days or something. And I remember that because I remember my windshield on my car was smashed apart. It's a true Milwaukee metal scene when that lasted for a few years. But hey, so I wanted to ask a couple more philosophy questions, and this is for each one of you, and you can answer it as a person, as an artist. And we'll start with you, Steph. One of the questions I ask is, what or who made you who you are?
Well, aside from the obvious, I don't know. I don't know.
You could say Sabbath. You could say.
I mean,
Black
it's just such a crazy question. Like, we've been watching Closer to Truth. I don't know if you know about that show.
I don't. Tell us
you
about
should
it.
You should definitely check it out. It's
a philosophy show.
It's a philosophy show about anything. Multiple infinite universes, tunneling. Morality is an argument for God. Like, all of this stuff, and Francis and I have been obsessed with it. But it's like, the reason I'm having trouble answering this is because it's like, the more that we watch this stuff and the more that we read about this stuff and talk about it, the more confused I am about what is life, why are we here, who am I, what am I, what is consciousness, am I even experiencing everything or nothing? What even is nothing? My brain can't even grasp the concept of nothingness because it has always subjectively experienced somethingness. So yeah, I don't know. I don't feel equipped to answer that question quite yet, and I may never.
Your philosophers either appear very humble or they're very arrogant, and humble is a good trait. Humble is a good. I know, because I take a look at the something and we'll go to you, Francis, in a second, but the something rather than nothing question, even part of the reason why the show ends up being such a variety is because of the approach of trying to answer an almost absurd philosophical question. It's either the most profound or the most absurd, or both.
Right.
And when we try to do that, and we try to get the language to describe what's going on, we laugh a lot. In philosophy, you end up laughing and being like, "Oh, isn't that the silliest, stupid thing? I don't even know what I'm saying anymore," and you just give up and start laughing. But
that's why it's great.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes I just arrive at the I'm just naturally curious, and I am overly analytical, and sometimes I just throw my hands up and I'm like, what is the point of even thinking about all this stuff if you'll never know, but then the next day I'm spend 2 hours thinking about intentionality and what's that term that we were just fucking talking about yesterday?
I don't know. I sleep like a baby when I think about this stuff too much. It's it just puts me into a blissful sleep because it allows me to not think about, things that are, of a concern, paying a medical bill or something.
If something is causal in sequence, what is that called? There's a term for that. It goes back and back and back and back infinitely.
Well, it's that under the basis, the something questions, there has to be something at the beginning for things causally to happen after, right? And the answer to that is God.
But why? But why the beginning? There doesn't if
we're still on a different question. Remember, we haven't gotten to this yet.
There might not even be a beginning if something is just an infinite.
So I asked. What I did is sometimes philosophy is a little bit behind the times, let's say, as great as the discipline that it is. But science is the big, question in science for a lot of cosmologists, right? As far as, the Big Bang, right? Is now the somethings have arrived, or if there's always somethings. But I had a Dr. Aaron McDonald, who is a sci-fi geek and an astrophysicist, and asking these questions, the question of something rather than nothing. And I think even the approach, or what even that question is supposed to mean. So I mentioned that to an artist, right? Something rather than nothing. They might not want to get into the God argument. They might say, hey, I create something. It never existed before. And yes, there's all these pieces and these elements, but this something can only go through my hands, my brain, and this type of thing. So this is the something from the nothing. But Francis, we do have the question, what or who made you who you are? And I have to at least give you a chance to take a stab at that one because Steph did.
I mean, again, like the boring like getting into, possibility and infinite regress of conditionality and all that kind of stuff. That's 4 hours of interesting conversations. I think the regular, answer to me is I think that you're born a certain way, that is set in a way that's probably pretty uncomfortable for a lot of people to realize, because it violates a lot of their feelings of agency. But I think I was a particular way.
You mean like with your genes?
I'm a particular way, stuff? and then all of these, every little tiny experience creates a work in progress that is certain proteins and genes in my brain express themselves in relation to different events and things that happen and different foods I ate, and all the little things make up this billions or trillions of little events happen to a way that you're going to be. And then there's this almost infinite, not infinite, but this extreme amount of pressure and change on a basic template. And so, I think that's at least a little more interesting than saying, my parents really loved me or something, which is true. But, and then there's, of course, like the big things, like, in the and I don't know if this is the way that reality actually is, but in the movie of like your life, I think that everyone writes or has in their head, there's the like big forks or whatever. I don't think that, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be an artist at the level that I've pursued it at, for instance, if my father hadn't died when I was young. And I think that's because I just think that I would have not, I just don't think that the pressures on my life would have probably led me to pursuing music and like art this fanatically. I just don't think my life would have gone that way. I think it would have caved into other things, like not caved like in a bad way. I just think that the arc of my life would have gone into a different direction, because my father's influence would have been a different thing. It's not that he wouldn't have been supportive of me being in a band or anything, but my parents are not artistic in any way and didn't even listen to music when I was growing up. Like they listened to the news on the radio. Like there was no music or art of any kind really in my life growing up. And I think that I probably would have done something else probably really seriously with my life if he had been an influence on my life going forward as a young adult, which I really miss, because as anyone who loses their father knows, you really miss having that person around. So I just think that's like that's probably the big event in my life that made me the most what I am.
Yeah. And thank you for that. What's going on with Caustic Casanova now? I know you've done some touring, and I know the world is a little bit topsy-turvy, but you want to kind of band update, or kind of let listeners know what's going on and like what to look
Yeah.
out for, maybe?
Yeah. Well, most recently and most excitingly, we just finished mixing our record. So yeah, our next full length is going to be our second on Magnetic Eye Records, and that's hopefully going to be out in June next year. But so we just finished mixing that in its entirety, and it's going to be mastered very soon, and then it will be on its way to the queue at the pressing plant, which may take a very, very long time. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean that's been the focus of a lot of what we've been doing for quite a while, and it's the ambition on this next record is pretty sky high, and it's really it's been putting it together and executing it has been extremely challenging, and we're always trying to reach for that which we can't really do. Or write music that's a little beyond our capabilities, or arrange, stuff that's a little beyond our capabilities. And
yeah, it's definitely our most out there record. And we've had to put it together sort of like some of it was put together remotely during the pandemic, like contributing riffs and stuff online. Especially with like 2 covers that we can't really talk about yet that we recorded entirely remotely, recorded and fleshed out.
They're not on the record.
They're not on the record, but yeah. So like that's been a particular challenge. And also this will be the first record to feature both of our guitar players, because we added a guitar player, Jake Kimberly, in 2019. And so you're definitely going to hear that influence on the record. And yeah, we're really excited.
It's got a 22-minute song on it.
All right. I love that ride. The episode coming on with Tauben or Not. I think we had a 15-minute song at the end, and if you go back into the archives, editor and producer Peter Bauer with his band Blazar, there's got to be a 16 to 17-minute outro track on that one. So
his band is called Blazar.
Blazar, Blazar, and on Bandcamp too. And it's interesting because in my estimation, it's been Peter's a good friend of mine, but it's really been good for him because him and the guys that are playing have come into contact with a lot of music that I listen to, a lot of metal that I listen to, and they're kind of like, oh, I didn't realize all this stuff was like floating out there. So, and you get on Bandcamp and you start to disappear into Polish doom, and you're not going to come out for 6 weeks.
Yeah, we've definitely gone down those rabbit holes.
I mean, there are just. I almost like restrict myself to not doing it because like if you go in a Bandcamp hole and you're just really in a mood to listen to music and have a glass of wine or something, I mean you could just, I mean I found a playlist, I found like just black metal bands that just do concept albums about World War One. I mean there's a lot of just that, like this band from Calgary only writes about the European theater of only writes about the war in Belgium, like the stuff is just, the variety is like, it's almost too much. It almost makes you, as an artist, sometimes it's like, oh my God, there's so much amazing stuff out there. And there's so much that you can't believe more people don't know about. Sometimes it's depressing.
And that's why it really annoys me when people say, because I overhear people saying like, there's no good music around anymore. They think that the music is what's on the radio, but it's like, my answer to that is like, I guarantee you're not digging. You're not trying to find it. Because if you were, there's no way that you would be saying this, regardless of what kind of music you're into. I'm not just talking about metal.
I really agree with that. You know what, I find that too, where there's scenes and things are going on, and the varieties of music once you go belay or whatever you're being fed is seemingly endless, and that's what we're talking about. But I also find like within the culture, I do a lot of stuff. I'm a big comic book and graphic novel person, and I have artists and guests on, and there is so much going on in the storytelling, the art, edginess, issues that don't show up in popular culture for a few years. But if you're in some of these cultures, you're reading about it, you're like, this stuff's out there. These issues are being talked about. There are different type of creators and persons of color and different artists from different countries. And you just got to go looking for it a little bit, because there's a whole lot. And I think metal's like that. I think music and Bandcamp's such a great way for folks to connect to all those things. I want to pose the something rather than nothing question, like just state it again. And it feels a little bit unfair, because I believe you've been answering the something rather than nothing question throughout the episode, and I don't want to discredit that, but I also have to provide you the proper opportunity to answer the big question.
Right.
It's a thrilling conclusion.
Fran's been champing at the bit to answer this, so I think he should go first, and I'll add.
Yeah. Why is there something rather than nothing, Francis?
Well,
prepare to have your minds blown, ladies and gentlemen. We have the answer to all of life's questions and why we're here.
Yes.
Well, there's I claim of absolutely no originality in John Leslie's 5 different. There's the question is absurd is one, is that it's absolutely unknowable and therefore ridiculous to even ask it. There's the argument from chance that the world that the reality, has to be some way, and this is it because chance fixed it that way. There's that, something rather than nothing because of value or or like principles or mathematics or something make it that way, or like consciousness, mind, God, or something is the ultimate ground of being is the 5th one. Now, what I think is that it's either, why is there something rather than nothing? I think it's either, I'm personally drawn to, the question is absurd. Like, the answer is that the question is ridiculous and absurd. Not like, oh, it's ridiculous for him to ask it, but that it's like, once you start teasing it apart, it becomes ridiculous because our brains are not really even well equipped to handle numbers over like 1,000, much less the concept of like infinity, much less the concept of actual nothing. And that whenever we are thinking about something from nothing, we're really thinking about something from something. And that our conception of nothing is a something. We can't really think of nothing.
Because like when you think of nothing, you're thinking of like black outer space, or like that's what I think of when I think of nothing. I think of the color black and I think of outer space, but that's not nothing. That's like there's a mathematical geometry like explanation for that. Physics can explain that. So that's not nothing. So like I think I mentioned earlier, like our brains, and Fran just said it, like our brains can't really conceive of nothingness. And so like what is nothingness? Like if it even.
So I mean, that to me, that's like what's attractive. And then the other one that would be the most attractive to me is like mind, consciousness, God, whatever you want to call it, is that anything that starts to look like that infinite contingency, if that's what is attractive to people, that to me starts to look like a creative force. If people say the laws of physics or mathematics create, that's nothing, and something comes from that.
Where do those laws come from?
That starts to look like if that starts to look like omniscience to me, the harder you look at it. Infinite contingency, regress, infinite anything in any direction starts to look like almost like an omniscient, all-powerful something. If you start to take a fine-tooth comb look at what infinite causality or infinite contingency really is, and then the whole concept of infinite contingency requires something non-contingent, because it in itself is a contingent process.
Yeah,
so anyway, that's
something-
to me. To me, it's either the absurdity. It's an absurd question, or to me, the concept of infinite contingency starts to look something like an infinite supreme power of some kind, perhaps unknowable, but
Well, I think it has to be something like outside of time and space.
Aha. Yeah.
And then so I would tend to agree with Fran. And then, I was raised Catholic. I don't consider myself religious. But I do think, like he said, everything is pointing me in the direction of supporting like some sort of just infinite being that's just there, that always has been there. But I don't necessarily think of that as God. And I think like a lot of the conversations regarding like who God is or what God is are like misinformed, or like people haven't even necessarily like agreed what they're talking about when they talk about God. And that's not an original like idea of mine. I'm in the middle of reading a book called The Experience of God by David Bentley Hart. The Experience of God, Being, Consciousness, Bliss. And again, it's not because I'm religious or anything. It's just like because I want to know more, and I'm just so curious about this. And he's been a guest on that podcast or that show that we mentioned. And so, yeah, so then my question mainly becomes like, okay, so say there is this infinite there-ness that created everything, the Big Bang, or was the beginning of the contingency regress or whatever. Why does it have to be called God? Why can't we call it Shu or Mike or something like? And so that I've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah, and I like how in the discussion
Or Stephanie, call it that too.
Well,
Costa Casanova.
it sounds like a future track. Stephanie is the something or something like that.
Yeah,
and
there you go. Or Stephanie is the nothing.
depending. No, I like the kind of like the inscrutability of the question that during the show over time. Buddhists look at this question and they say, silly human being, don't spend too much time here. Like it's fun. Like within Buddhism, they recognize, like, I think Buddhists recognize that it's fun in titillating to ask these questions, but driving for an answer, they caution against that. It's like, we're suffering beings. This might add more suffering if you get too hinged on this one. Yeah. And
that's why, like, I can't, I have a limit to how much I can think about this stuff or read about this stuff, or, binge watch episodes of True. What's it called? Closer to Truth.
Closer to Truth. That's my. I got to do some.
There's
homework.
20 seasons of it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
At a certain point, it just becomes like.
Are they any closer though? Are they like really close?
No, but there are 3 episodes about this question.
Okay.
And
okay. All right. Well,
I watched them to retrain my mind to think about them. I don't have John Leslie's 5 principles of why there's something rather than nothing just on hand on my tip of my tongue.
Well, hey, I know you mentioned in wrapping up here, I know you mentioned, we were talking a bit about Bandcamp. Could you just make sure the audience knows, listeners know where to, find your stuff, like your website, and, just to make sure they can find you no matter what?
Yeah. Well, we have a website. It's CostaCasanova.com. And then from there, you can access basically anything that you need. But we're on Bandcamp, Big Cartel, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Music, Twitter, all that stuff. And it's
Facebook.
It's all just /Caustic Casanova.
Yeah. It's very easy to Google.
Very unique band name that was coined in 2005. Works to our advantage in that regard.
Yeah.
Very Googleable. We were ahead of the curve on that. There's no other one. There's no mistaking. You get all the results are the results. So we don't have to have a no vowel band name or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sure it's a little bit more direct than typing something rather than nothing.
It did
So,
cross my mind that it might be hard for people to find.
yeah, well, no, thank you for that. And folks, I've released a music episode before. We're gonna have a metal 8-track episode, so you get to hear a bit more from Costa Casanova and some of their music on that episode. But I just want to let you know, for me, it's been a great pleasure to meet you. I really adore your music. I was happy to receive the report from my field correspondent who ran into your music,
Where
and
did he see
also
us?
He saw us
What's
in
that?
Baltimore, right?
What's that?
He saw us in Baltimore recently.
Yeah, he's based in outside of Philly, so I think it was must have been Baltimore, right? Was that
I
with
think so.
last few
Yeah.
weeks? But in just being able to connect back to Maryland, I hope the storm blowing through that you stay safe, and that we hear a lot more music from Costa Casanova. Thank you so much, Steph and
You will.
Francis. Really enjoy the conversation, and it looks like I got 20 seasons of Closer to the Truth, right? Is that it?
Yep.
20 episodes to
Fun.
to get into, and maybe after watching it, I can just wrap up the podcast and say it was on season 19, episode 4. I just
They
missed
answered
it.
it. Yeah, enjoy the trip. It's quite a journey.
Thank you so much, and hope to get to chat soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so
Great.
much for
Thanks
having
for
us.
having
This was
us.
so awesome, and yeah.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing,